All right, everybody. This is the long awaited video. This is the video that you've all been waiting for, the awaited one. This one is going to be my first one that has any degree of effort put into it. Um, as somebody who makes these videos on occasion, I do not want any of my videos to be engaging. I want the fact that I'm good at RS to PK to be the selling point. And that's kind of still true, but I thought that this one could be at least interesting for people who aren't necessarily trying to actively play at a high level. This might be interesting to people that are maybe just a little interested in the format. And so this one doesn't have quite as high of a like a technical you don't have to have quite as high of a technical understanding on this one just because you don't need to like know like interactions or anything, but you will probably need to know all of the decks that I'm going to be referencing. So I would say to definitely check Jason Klaczynski's blog on the EX format, as well as the results from the tournaments from this year, 2024. So the Double Rainbow 2024 results and the Stambler Open results. So I would say if you go through those, then you should have a pretty good idea of what decks I'm referring to in this video, and maybe even some of the players that I'm referring to in this video. But I just want to kind of get that out of the way first. So I did this as a slideshow on Google Slides. Is that what it's called? It's not Sheets. It's the other one. Also, I'm a little sick, but it's cool. Don't worry, I'm okay. So getting into it. So I decided to group this by for those of you that are zoologist fans, zoologists, no, paleontologist fans in the scene. I decided to group it by the evolutionary periods of the world or of the life. I don't know. So the Precambrian meta. This is the pre-TCG1 meta. So this didn't really exist in the way that the meta exists now. I mean, it wasn't really a meta in that there were decks countering other decks. It was what decks do you think are going to be the best decks? So it was like mostly just the people that were thinking about it, primarily Jason and his friends, um, were just kind of throwing ideas out. So a lot of the concepts of the best decks from around this time were the best decks that were played during the EX formats. So you might say, well, LBS or yeah, LBS is pretty good. Back in the day, it's probably pretty good in this format. It gets access to like, Kyogre EX, and um, Meta Knight's pretty good, and it gets access to like Sceptile EX now. And there was never really a home for Alligator Delta, and so maybe that's good. Um, so that was just kind of like the way that it was for a while. Was just this like hypothesized idea of what the meta would be like. Obviously, lock decks and bomb decks weren't really on too many people's radar at this point. Lock decks for sure. The most that would happen was, maybe they thought about, 2006 Mew Lock with a couple of new cards, or maybe Bomb Tower was still on people's radar, but it wasn't really considered to be as highly esteemed as because it doesn't really get any new tricks that it wants to do, so it probably was looked aside for that reason. And then at the bottom, I have this lovely little who cares, because who cares? I mean, you know, if you ask like anybody who's good at the format now, and you went back in time to like 2018 and asked them to like come up with the best RS to PK decks, like they'd probably have similar ideas. Like they probably wouldn't be cranking out like the sauce that they've cranked out now. So, you know, like props to the people that like were coming up with decks at this time, but I would say that a lot of them were pretty rudimentary, which is fine. I mean, they would probably admit the same. So, and then we have the Cambrian explosion. So for those of you paleontologists watching, this is like when all the exciting stuff started happening. We started getting stuff that wasn't just like troglodytes and isopods, or maybe that was when we got troglodyte, whatever. Anyways, so TCG1 implemented the RS to PK format either in May 2021 or slightly before. And there were a bunch of EX tournaments run on Sunday afternoons by Jason Klasinski. And these tournaments were usually like rather small. I mean, somewhere between like I think 8 to 20 people for the most part. And we have the results cataloged here. Excuse me. James Arnold was kind enough to catalog these. We don't have lists of these, the deck, any of the decks played at these events, unless people have their personal lists. But I didn't really want to go out and ask a bunch of people and hunt them down for that. And uh, we don't have, yeah, so we don't have lists, but we do have like what won the tournaments. And for the most part, it's kind of what I've been talking about. It's we see like Shiftry, we see Ryegs. Shiftry was probably a deck that didn't really take off in 2007. I'm pretty sure, but it has a lot of tools that are nice for the RS2PK metagame. Ryegs was considered a good deck back in the day. Nita Queen was considered a good deck back in the day. We do see Bomb Tower popping up every now and then around this time. Nothing super like crazy. Metacham EX is funny. That's probably the last time Metacham as a deck ever did anything in this format. Um, but nothing super crazy. The probably the but the thing I do want to call attention to is 2019 is the first appearance of Railer topping, and this is actually a different version of Railer than most people are familiar with when they hear Railer. Well, I guess most people don't know what Railer means, so that doesn't really apply. But most people that play RS to PK have an idea of what Railer is. But this was not that. This one played Wobbuffet, like the retreat increase one. Delta Chime Echo, the Holland engine, no castaways, and its main goal was PAL locking while using Rayquaza kind of as like spot removal, I'm guessing. Um, Probably closer to Lock. Well, it's a lot closer to Lock than like Railer is today. And this deck was created by Chuck, and it was the first like I would say modern RS to PK deck. You see everything else on this list, and it's with the exception of like Meganium Delta Blastoise, like the first thing that really strikes me as like somewhat novel. Something that could only really function in RS to PK. So, yeah, I did want to kind of draw attention to that one. Um, and then continued. So we just have some more results here. So we see, excuse me. We see some more Railer. We see some more typical decks that you kind of expect. Like Bombtar, Dragtrode, Ryex, Arcanine. They start running night tournaments as well, and we see some things feature in there that are also still known today, like Bayonet EX and uh, is that all? Gardevoir EX? Yeah, so Gardevoir was also around back then. LBS, of course. I think at this point they were already kind of dropping Steelix from the list, which is interesting because the excuse me, the POW stuff was not really around too much at the time, but I guess already by now Rayleigh was probably annoying enough that you didn't want to include Steelix, and Pidgeot isn't common enough to warrant its inclusion, I guess. Um, and then it becomes similar to like a more modern RS to PK. I mean, if you told me that these results were from like I don't know this year, I could believe a good chunk of them, at least if assuming the Railer lists were modified. Um, Bombtar makes his first stopping appearance. I'm pretty sure that's a lie. I'm pretty sure that is a dead lie. Yeah. Okay. Well, never mind that. Let's just delete that. Oh, I can't delete it on this end. Okay, good to know. So this is misinformation. This is not true. But Bombtar, from what I gather, was not considered as strong, and it kind of took a while to pop up. Raylar with Wobbuffet continues to be played until Tord, Mr. Tord, Mr. Reklev wins with a version that is probably closer to the modern Raylar. This Tourney 13, the Night Tourney 13. Of course, I don't have his exact list, but given that it wasn't denoted to have Wobbuffet, I assume that it's closer to the like Cessation Crystal, Castaway Engine, you know, slimmed down version that we see today. And then as far as the actual player base, it's a lot of people that are, existing players that are really good and retro players who are, kind of specializing in this format, at least for the moment. And that's generally how like the Western cream of the crop has played out till this day. I mean, like who else would it be? It's obviously going to be the top players and the people that are specializing in retro. But anyways, then we have the switch to limitless. So at this point, the results are significantly easier to find. So you can kind of click through those on your own. If you need the link, just let me know. But um, excuse me, one second. Sorry, I have allergies and the weather is really bad here. So this is the first time that we have access to the full lists, and we have access to the list everybody played, everybody's results. So we have a lot more data on on this period. And this occurred in May 2021. Wait, is that right? Hold on. Oh, maybe it started. Maybe these EX tournaments started earlier. I should figure that out. Okay, wait. Yeah, no, this was May 2020. I'm so sorry. I love misinformation. This started in May 2020. Forgive me. I love misinformation. I promise the rest of it is better than this. So all this started in May 2020. And then May 2021 is when we switched to limitless. And then we had access to all the breakdowns and such. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. Um, and so the challenge era, like, while we don't have a lot of the like finer details, I mean, realistically, does it really matter what the drag tro list, what the bomb tar list looked like at this point? I mean, it's probably not too far off from what we have, but it's probably a little suboptimal. But it was probably fine for the meta at the time. Um, and then we have the Limitless era. So this was May 2021 to November 2022. Obviously, like we still have Limitless, but the Jason stopped running the tournaments in November 2022. So Flygon EX decks become more popular and sort of surge as like a leading meta threat. Um, the Railer lists begin to look very close to what they are today. You still see that people aren't really sure about like the super scoop up counts and how many Rayquaza you want to run, and do you want to play dual ball? Do you want to play how many energy? But I mean, for the most part, it's pretty self-explanatory. We start seeing Meta Knight and Mutrick pick up a little bit more, although neither of them are super successful. LBS or just Lugia Blastoise. I still like calling it LBS because I mean you get what people mean when they say LBS, even if there's no Steelix. But it's still very popular, probably because it's very fun. It's very dynamic. A lot of people played it, back in the Bush administration, so they have a fondness for it. They kind of remember when things were less complicated, and so they play a complicated deck. And then Rayler becomes quite dominant and starts really just taking over the whole Limitless tournament scene. Between Jason, Chuck, and Tord all piloting it, and the fact that it took Bombtar a while to kind of pop off, and Bombtar does well against Rayler for the most part. And there was obviously no like the Raticate stuff back in this time was very primitive. So and nobody was playing it. So um So Raylar really had a chance to just kind of dominate the metagame. And it continued its dominance for most of 2021. And even when you look back at the deck lists from this era, a lot of them do not really seem to account for this. It was kind of just like, well, hope I don't hit Raylar. Like, there's no Ratlock, which is fine. I mean, it didn't exist at the time, but there's not really that many bomb decks, which seems like a pretty logical uh, counter to Raylar. I mean, you're dealing with a couple of the problems. It deals with the prize count. It deals with if you admin them, it kind of cuts off their castaway engine after the bomb. If uh, you know, you're able to get energy back that they got removed from ER2. You can get out of POW by blowing up and retreating. So I'm kind of surprised that for the most part, I didn't really see that there were like obvious meta shifts as a result of Raylar just beating everything. But eventually there were. I mean, it couldn't stay like this forever. So in February 2022, Bombtar wins a tournament, and we start to see like Bombtar prop up more and more after this. Camler also sees its first appearance in February of 2022. Um, so Camler is another RS to PK exclusive deck for the most part. Um, and the 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 second real deck that's kind of like invented at this point. So we had the Raylar pop up during the Limitless era, or sorry, the pre-Limitless era, the Challenge era. Raylar with Wobbuffet, and then just sort of default Raylar, normal Raylar, and then we saw Camler during this era come up in 2022. Jason Klaczynski was the one who was able to create the Camler deck, I believe. Um, and March 2022 sees the first win and maybe appearance by Scrambled Eggs. From what I gather, people had kind of had this deck on their radar, and maybe somebody played it at some point, once or twice, but wasn't really anything that I don't think anybody took it super seriously before this, but I know Jason Klaczynski was very confident that this deck was good. He was confident this deck had the sauce, and so this was its first appearance, where successful appearance. So after that, Scrambled Eggs is really like the last piece of the puzzle for understanding a lot of the like RS to PK that probably most people are familiar with. Um, I'd say like Camler, Raylar, and Scrambled Eggs are like kind of the trifecta of these like really really strong decks that did not exist anywhere near that capacity back in any of the EX formats. So Scrambled Eggs is the one that did kind of exist back then, but it didn't have access to Cessation Crystal, which is kind of the main reason that it's played today. Um, and a lot of the advantages that it has in this format didn't really exist in the same way back then. Like you didn't have to worry about Raylar back then, and it does pretty well against Raylar, I think. But there are some differences between that era and now, of course. The Sceptile EX and the Anti-Sceptile EX cards weren't really utilized a whole lot. Um, so you didn't really see like that meta and counter meta take hold yet. There weren't as many stage 2 decks. We were just sort of starting to get the Flygons being dominant, but there were mostly like I mean there was some Gardevoir lists floating around, and LBS was quite big, I guess, and you did see some Drag Trode, but not to the extent that we see now, I would say. Yeah, Gardevoir was seen, but not omnipresent. Sceptile EX as a deck was not really around at all, and of course, I think now it's considered to be at least significantly stronger than it was back then. And then some of the other maybe unpopular but still considered very strong decks like Dragonite EX Delta and Kingdra EX Delta weren't really played at that time. They hadn't really figured out how to play these decks yet. I don't think. Also, like Yokohama Destiny surfaces around June or July of 2022, and by the end of 22, so of course, by the end of the tournaments, because they went to November 2022, some more and more Japanese players begin entering the tournaments, and some of them even see success around this time as well. So um, that kind of wraps up that general era. So we saw a whole lot of innovation. We saw like Rayler's dominance, and then like the decks prop up to counter Rayler, and then as a large part of those decks having a good Rayler matchup, they ended up being some of the strongest decks in the format to this day even. So then the next era is a little bit nebulous and hard to describe, but I would say that it's a lull into like the EX Brawl at the Mall and then like another lull. So the last EX Mega Battle was November 2022, won by Tord on LBS. He would also win the Brawl at the Mall on LBS, which I think was February 2023, if I remember right. It was sometime after that, but I mean, it's easily accessible information. And the EX the LBS brawl at the mall win was pretty impressive, because he had to get through like decks that LBS should not be beating. But after that, there were like scattered small tournaments held here and there by the Aqua Piplup, and I think like some people were definitely playing the format a lot, but since Jason wasn't hosting the events, there weren't as many of the like, old school players who are, kind of checking in on the format type of deal. A lot of those audiences had kind of already been turned off by the Railer dominance, and then these new decks, like these newfangled, Camler and Scramble decks things like I think that there was a point of frustration that these decks were like, these like kind of difficult to understand how they're good in some ways decks. I don't know if that's exactly what it is. I'm kind of extrapolating, but that could be related. It's not fun. It's fun to play your like LBS and go like 4-3 at a tournament, but playing your LBS and like having to get pal locked for 5 games is probably not very fun. Um, During this time, though, we did see the Ratlock with Sceptile, Sceptile as a deck, Bomb Champ, which I think actually won an EX Mega Battle or something. Maybe I'm misremembering, but we did see Bomb Champ as well as Destiny continue to get refined during this time, and I think today that all of these are seen as pretty top decks by most people. Um, and so that was kind of happening without tournaments going on for the most part. It was just kind of people were playing on TCG1, and they had kind of been honing those decks more and more and playing in person as well. Um, and then getting into the Stambler era. So that's this current year, January 2024 to present. This video is August 2024. So we see those decks, Bomb Champ, Sceptile, Dragonite, EX Delta, and Ratlock become fully realized. Sceptile EX, just generally speaking, really starts to hit its stride in this year, 2024. It's the most common EX in the in the Stambler like Top Cut, for example. Um, we also see a lot of Fire Mew to counteract this in weird decks. We see Fire Mew in like Bomb Champ. We see Fire Mew in Bayonet. We see Fire Mew in like Flygon. We see, Fire Mew in all kinds of things. And the meta really like diversifies. It goes from being, this like weird thing where it's like a bunch of the best decks of, 2006, and then like some newfangled weird stuff into like a bunch of decks from 2006 that have been really refined, like like Tyranitar, like Arcanine or whatever, and some decks that that are new but aren't super crazy. I mean, Bomb Champ is pretty intuitive. Dragonite EX Delta. It makes sense. It's a strong attacker. It has trainer lock, etc. One second. So then we also have Cradily, Metagross, Swampert, and Kingdra seeing success as well. I should probably mention who was kind of bringing these decks to the forefront because I guess it did with the other new decks. I know Bomb Champ was something that Kenten had been working on, and he's seen the most success with it. I know that his version of Sceptile EX is probably the the one that's seen the most success, and I think that a lot of that can be attributed to him. Dragonite EX, I don't know if there was a specific player who really honed Dragonite. I think a lot of people just started playing this deck more and realized it's actually pretty good. And then Ratlock was myself as well as Little River. I think we spent a lot of time practicing this deck and making it making it better. Um, and then for Cradily, Q got second place at Stambler 2 with Cradily, with like a very unique approach to the deck. Metagross Swampert was a mysterious player, taking inspiration from Aggron Swampert, which I believe was made by JB Champ, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that. And he also, mysterious player, also made his Kingdra EX Delta list pretty far ahead of the other Kingdra EX list I'd seen. So those are kind of the people that have been honing those decks. And from here, who knows? We'll talk about that later as to the potential paths forward. But yeah, so that's the general history of the format. That's the general history of RS to PK. That's the history. But now, you're probably checking the YouTube uh, runtime. You're probably checking down at your screen right now, and you're saying, "Well, there's so much time left in this video. How can there be so much time left in this video when you just said that we've explored the history?" And that's because we're forgetting a very small part of this. We're just overlooking something, which is that there was a whole other place playing this format the whole time. So there is more. There is more to this. There is more. There is going to be more. And we're going to cover that right now. We're going to cover the Japanese parallel universe for all my Stephen Hawking fans in the audience. So, in 2006, Japanese Pokemon TCG tournaments were held with similar regulations to how RSPK is held, but there were no power keepers in the format, and the games were 20-minute Swiss rounds, and Japan never had official RS2PK tournaments. Japan never had a single official RS2PK tournament. Events were quite similar. They were only missing one set, but I mean, the meta was quite different for other reasons. I mean, it's a long time ago, so the meta was different for that reason, and the time format is insane. So I mean, it's going to be different for that reason as well. But this is an important, like if nothing else, this is an important clarification to take away from this. RS2PK did not exist in any official capacity anywhere in the world. It is a format that we play because we think we should play it. I want to make that very clear. It's not even like e-card series where like yeah, in the interim of some portion of time that did kind of exist as a format. No. RS to PK never existed. ADV PCG never existed. It existed because people looked at the cards and it made sense to play them. Anyways, moving on from that. Aggro decks were hit and run back in this is in 2006. So when they had, RS to Dragon Frontiers basically. So hit and run decks were commonplace. Lock decks were non-existent. People weren't thinking about lock decks at this time, and there was no reason to with a 20-minute Swiss timer. So you just can't possibly win in that time. So here's some of the results. These are on uh, what website is this from? It's an English website. It's like the one that has all the retro decks. If you need the link, just let me know. I'll post it. But these are some of the results from that time. There are some more, but it's a really diverse metagame. A lot of people were playing the Magma Groudon. A lot of people are playing hit and run decks. Um, but quite a lot of diversity. Also, a lot of Scizor EX as well. So yeah, so some conclusions. Excuse me. From this era, Magma Groudon is very popular. I guess like I don't know. When I was first looking at RS2PK, I mean the serotonin button was going crazy when I was like, oh, you can play Magma Groudon, which has a terrible Pokebody, with a card that shuts off all Pokebodies in play, not even just yours. So it locks and it like unlocks Groudon, so it makes sense. And I'm guessing that's how like everybody in Japan felt too, because they love playing this deck. I mean, there's so much Magma Groudon at this time. I mean, it's very diverse though. A lot of things going on. Not very many bomb decks at all. Hyper aggressive decks like Scizor. Now, I have it on good confidence that Little River told me that um, Scizor EX players who are he wanted to emphasize who are not skilled, who are not very good at the game, they would play like a lot of the coin flip cards. They play ER2, they play reversals, which you're supposed to play in the deck, but they would play those cards. And if they got a lead, which Scizor EX often does, it's a very fast, aggressive deck. They would start playing these cards and they would roll the dice for a long time, and then they would, let the dice go, and the dice would roll across the table and under the table, and then their opponent would have to like move out of their chair and get the dice, put it back on the table, and then like once they were back, they would do another reroll sequence, and maybe this one would like just barely fall off the table, so then they'd have to pick it up again, and so like they would do this to stall allegedly. Um, and so that's part of why Scizor was a popular pick. Now, I'm not saying that the people that did well with Scizor did that, but the rumor is that some weaker players were engaging in this sort of dice tomfoolery. So whether or not you believe that is up to you. Also, Polytoad hit and run. You probably saw that there were a couple Actually, yeah, there's a couple Polytoads on here, and there's more on the page that shows all of these for 2006. But yeah, Polytoad was quite popular as well, because what you would do is you would attack a few times and then take a KO, maybe a couple KOs, and then you would just keep going to your fossils and just wait until time was called. So this format, it's not even just the fact that there's a set missing. I mean, the set missing, Power Keepers is not like the most influential set in RS2PK for sure. I mean, you can play without that set, and the metagame wouldn't be that much different. But the fact that there's a 20-minute Swiss timer for IRL play, I mean, for TCG1, that would be like a 7-minute timer, if not shorter, per player, which is just crazy. And so a lot of these decks were predicated on exploiting that, and they were predicated on, can you win fast and by just taking like 3 or 4 prizes and then stalling somehow. So that was the format back then. Now, you might be wondering, what is the connection that this has to RS to PK? I mean, the card pool is similar. How did Japan think about RS to PK in the way that we did? Well, they thought about this in 2015. 2015. So several years before Jason Klaczynski was writing about it on his blog, Kenton was writing about it on his blog. Um, so just to clarify, the Japanese rotation occurred before Power Keepers came out. The rotation in Japan was FRLG and on, and the Power Keepers was released. And then it's probably closer to the World's 2007 format than it is to RSTPK. I mean, once you cut a lot of like admin and POW and all that stuff, then it's probably more similar to wait, would admin be cut? Yeah, I'm pretty sure admin came before FRLG, right? I'm pretty sure. Anyways, we're not worried about that format. If you want to play that format, I mean, knock yourself out. But probably closer to 2007 than RS2BK. Not to mention the time limits. Um, so after all this, maybe several years down the road, interest in 2006 Summer Battle Roads formats is extinguished, and the concept of a full block using the full block disappears until 2015. Now, the this is the Big Bang because it comes before the Cambrian. It's before the world even exists as we knew it in the West. So Kenton Magic Hand and some friends, uh, similar to Jason and his friends later, would brew up the idea of playing the full ADV PCG block during 2015. An ADV PCG, for those of you who don't know, is just Japan's way of saying RSPK. It's the advanced Pokemon card game format. They started doing this because the standard format was so bad and they hated it and wanted to play something else. Um, and then other players like Negi or Raspberry Bell played it and theory crafted. And some surprising results, like Negi coming up with 204 Pidgeot during this time. I know I said I wouldn't use a whole lot of technical language, but 204 Pidgeot, I mean, it's seen play here and there since a while. So very ahead of his time in that regard. Kenton writes a whole bunch of posts on his blog about this, quote unquote new format that he's been brewing up. He writes a lot of posts. Um, he's just cranking these out all the time. He's writing about what is PCG. He's writing about these cards. And despite being really old, a lot of those info is still usable. I mean, it's still true. He's talking about Electrode EX here, and he's saying that you can use it in combo with Admin and Magic Hand, uh, which is hand extension, and Scramble Energy, and talks about the pros and cons of these cards. Now, obviously, he did not have 10 years of foresight to talk about Ratlock or Railer or whatever, but a lot of the information in there is still pretty good. And if you want to link to that blog, you can let me know, and I will post it as well. It took me a long time to figure out how to navigate the blog, so thank you to Little River for helping me with that as well. Um, so from children's card game to slightly more advanced children's card game. So Canton's presence in Japan, like his figure there, is similar to what Jason is, kind of in the Western TCG world. Canton has had success playing the Pokemon cards in Japan, and so when he's doing his blog about this, similar to Jason's blog, a lot of people that play casually or played back in the day or something are reading it, and they are they're liking what they're seeing. So in 2018, the Card Secret Shop in Tokyo starts running these ADV PCG tournaments that Canton has been posting about for the first known time in history. This is the first time that anybody is running quote unquote like sanctioned RS to PK tournaments. It's Card Secret Shop in Tokyo in 2018. Maybe like some people were running them with their friends in 2006 or 2007 or whatever, casually at their league or something. I mean, who knows? If you do know though, let me know because I'd like to know that. But 2018 was like the first time that we really had tournaments that were actually running this format. So they actually were a little bit quicker on learning that Bomb Tower was good. However, they were playing it with Pidgeot, so make of that what you will. They were playing Bomb Tower with Pidgeot, Gardevoir, Ryax, and Raydoom, and those were considered some of the top decks. Raydoom, you might not know even if you play the format, but it's like Rayquaza EX, Delta, and Houndoom, and a bunch of uh, other cards. Like, basically, you are just playing like the game plan is just to attack a bunch of times with Rayquaza EX and then lock down their trainers with Houndoom and use like ER2 and that kind of thing and Curse Stone or whatever. None of the super popular, not a popular deck at all now, but it's probably not bad. Um, and they were only really playing this format among other Japanese players. I mean, they weren't just there was no TCG1 to play it online at this point, and nobody in Japan was talking to people outside of Japan to play the format with because we didn't conceive of it much at this point. Um, so of course, eventually you probably know that Japan and the West do interact a lot in RS to PK. So how did this occur? So the tourneys continued to go on, and then they stopped during COVID, and then they continued to come back as COVID started lifting restrictions. And the Canton fans continued to read his blog and continued playing. Excuse me. Continued coming out to these tournaments, and of course TCG1 is able to get RS to PK on it, around this time. And even though uh, in 2021 we're having tournaments uh, both in Japan and in America. In Japan, it's IRL, and in America, or in the West rather, it's online. Neither of us knew about the other one's existence. We didn't know that they were already developing this format, and they didn't know that there were tournaments that they could have been entering this whole time. Um, and then around May 2022, Japanese player Running High, who's a younger Japanese RSTPK player, learned about Jason Klaczynski's blog as well as the tournaments that he'd been putting on, and he brought this knowledge to Japan. And he introduced Camler to Japan for the first time. He was the first Japanese player to pilot Camler, and I believe he won a tournament around this time using it. Um, Also, I don't know if I mentioned it later, but like Stantler was not really a card that anybody was considering much in Japan at around this time. It was not they didn't have Railer, they didn't have like Yokohama Destiny, they didn't have Ratlock, they didn't have Camler, they didn't have like any of the weird Stantler Marowak things or anything. So it went from being, binder fodder to $20 card. So if you bought low on the Stantler market, you would have been raking it in around that time. Goes from 50 cents to $20. Um, so then as time goes on, uh, the the timelines start to really converge. Um, by the end of 2022, Japanese players were now keenly aware of what the Western metagame was like, and there was a lot of growth as a result of these, like I think, greater knowledge of both of these spheres. So in Double Rainbow 1 2022, there was some knowledge of Western decks, but it wasn't super widespread, and it was just a small tournament of 16 players. And then July 2023, Double Rainbow 2, there were 43 players, and Western decks were well known. I mean, everyone was kind of aware of these, scrambled eggs and Camler and Railer and even Ratlock at this point. And then June 2024 had 89 players. This is the largest RS2PK tournament in history, and there were Western players in attendance. So we kind of see the evolution here, where some people knew about Western decks to everybody knew about Western decks, and now there's like full, Western players are playing in the Japanese tournaments. But the Japanese metagame, even though it technically is operating with the same information. It's perfect information. It's not 100% the same. There are differences in what they want to include in their format. So here are some of the anti-Stantler tidbits that I got talking to Little River. Um, so there weren't really like comprehensive articles or like breakdowns about these new decks, like Raylar, Camler, or Ratlock. So they were really kind of unintuitive. It was, they saw that they're winning and they heard that there's, Chuck and Tord are playing these decks, but they couldn't really understand what the um what the point was. They saw Rayquaza EX and they saw Stantler and they saw Wobbuffet and they're like, well, I mean these cards look good, but we don't really know how to like use them to beat Negi when he's playing Bombtar or something like that. So, but still, some people did play Stantler, and the Japanese players also really did not like Stantler, a lot of them. One Japanese tournament even banned it. I don't know which one it was. It was not the Card Secret tournament, but it was another one. Just banned Stantler, says you can't use it. And then many top players like Negi hated Stantler. And another reason that they like also kind of disliked Stantler is that Japanese players are more stingy with proxies. They really don't like using them, and they did not want to have to shell out a lot of money for a playset of Stantler to play a deck that nobody liked playing with or against. And also, Stantler is not like shiny or anything. So actually, it might be shiny in Japan. I can't remember. Um, Wait, no, I'm pretty sure it's not. So, there were also like concerns, and this is like sometimes reported on, but it misses some of the context. So there are concerns in Japan about Stantler decks being able to win in RS2PK. And I think a good chunk of this is actually like because the format that they played that was closest to this, which is their Battle Roads 2006 format, um, had 20 minute Swiss timers. And so none of these decks could ever be, you know, successful in that format. And a lot of the top players today still, um, uh, in RSTPK in Japan played during that time. I mean, Kenton and Negi are some of the best players in RSTPK, and they won Battle Roads in 2006 in Japan. So that probably influences it a lot. Um, and then just kind of lastly, we've kind of discussed the fun facts about both formats and how the English and the Japanese formats have kind of converged. And so we can kind of talk about the path forward. So the Stambler 4 is this weekend. So that's obviously the next tournament on the horizon. There's also rumors for what's going to happen next, but nothing is set in stone yet. There's new ideas about how Rayler should be played. I know that Tord's lists have been a little strange for most players. He's playing cards like Giant Stump, Brinies, four Super Scoop Ups. He's playing strange things in his list, and time will tell if that ends up being the way that people play Rayler moving forward, or if it's just Tord likes playing them that way. Um, we saw Jason playing Rockets Wobbuffet in Camler, and I've also thought that it could be used in other decks. Like I saw Tomi Okaka playing it in Bomb Caddy, where I think it has use. I think it has use in Ratlock. It could have use in Railer. So I think Rockets Wobbuffet as a way to like get back pals and potentially cessation crystals and potentially like surprise time machines in Bomb Caddy is worth investigating, I would say. I think that could be something that we see that gets maybe that's the next hot new thing. Also, Electrode and non-Electrode decks. Excuse me. We saw Christmas playing that in playing Electrode EX and Ratlock of all things. I also just think that playing Trode-X in just weird things like playing Trode-X in Camler, playing Trode-X even in like in Drag Trode, I think it's very good. I think Trode is just really nice to have, and even though Sceptile EX is very common, um, Powdex, Cestex are very common, and they hate dealing with Trode-X. So, also like Radicate Soup. What I mean by that is decks that are just playing Raticate. So I've messed around with it in Nidoqueen. I've got like a weird Raticate Gardevoir list. Obviously Q's Cradily list kind of includes this too, since it plays two on Rat. Um, so I think we could potentially start to see this more. It's sort of trending that way. And then we could also just see a return to tradition. I mean, the format looks more and more unrecognizable as time goes on. You know, we start seeing these like insane hit and run decks. Hit and run like hit and run decks are kind of hard for me to include in the timelines here because they've virtually always existed, but the way that they look now is, you know, completely insane. With Septalia X and Minun and Doug Trio and Jirachi and Pals and Curse Stones and who knows? It's got so much stuff in it now. But with all these crazy looking decks, we might just see a return to like normal decks. I mean, who's to say that once the dust is settled, you know, a deck like Meta Knight doesn't suddenly start proving itself, or we don't suddenly see like a huge burst of Arcanines since nobody's really playing Latios anymore, or you know, that kind of thing. I think Gardevoir's a lot better right now, and that deck has been a known quantity for ages. So, yeah. So, who can really say what's going to happen? I just wanted to kind of throw out some stuff that I've been thinking about and noticing, but I mean, my guess is as good as anyone's as far as that goes. And finally, I wanted to give some special thanks to some people that made this possible. So Jason Lazinski was able to send me information about the tournaments, as well as James Arnold, who cataloged and archived the results from those early EX tournaments. Um, the Aquapipla created the thumbnail for this video. He's involved with the art for, and like these people are like do so much. All the people in this special things like have done so much for the format. But specifically for this video, he created the video, the thumbnail for this video. Aquabiblub did. And then Little River and Negi or Raspberry Bell, I communicated with in order to learn more about the Japanese format before making this video. Um, and they were invaluable in helping me learn about the ins and outs of the 2006 uh, Battle Roads format as well as the Japanese ADV PCG metagame. And so that's about going to wrap it up. So I think that if there's anything that I got that was inaccurate, or if you want any links to any of the resources that I discussed here, feel free to comment down below. Or if you have any questions, I will try to do my best to answer. And yeah, if there's nothing else, then I will go ahead and cut this one off because I've spent enough time. Whoa, we're almost at 1 hour. Okay, yeah, all right, goodbye. Bye.